In 2012, a young girl was playing with her classmates at a school playground in rural Australia. During their play, she made a deeply troubling statement to her friends. She revealed that her 12-year-old sister was pregnant, and the family didn't know which of her brothers had fathered the child. This alarming disclosure reached local authorities, who immediately opened an investigation. However, nothing could have prepared law enforcement for what they were about to discover. This wasn't simply an isolated incident of sibling abuse. They had stumbled upon what would become known as one of the most severe cases of familial abuse in Australian history. The investigation revealed a family engaged in systematic incestuous practices spanning 5 generations. Welcome to Behind the Crime Scene. If you're new here, please subscribe to the channel and feel free to leave a comment if you're already familiar with this case. The family at the center of this case has been referred to in court documents and media as the Colt family, though this isn't their actual surname. Due to legal protections, the identities of everyone involved, including the perpetrators, have been kept confidential. Throughout this discussion, I'll be using the pseudonyms assigned by the court. This case is extraordinary in its scope. It's difficult to comprehend how such deeply entrenched patterns of abuse could persist across multiple generations within a single family. When authorities uncovered this case, they found nearly 40 members of the Colt family, many of whom were themselves the product of incestuous relationships. With a history extending back at least 5 generations, the complexity and scope of this case is staggering. Let's examine how it all unfolded. In 2012, just outside Boorowa, New South Wales, a large extended family lived on an isolated farm deep in the woods. The Colt family had developed a reputation among locals as peculiar. They were notably standoffish and shrouded in mystery. Very few outsiders were ever allowed onto their property, and for reasons that would later become clear, the family guarded their privacy fiercely. The true scale of the family living on that farm was unknown to most people in the area. While locals knew the Colts existed, they had no idea that approximately 40 family members, including numerous adults and children, were living on the property. The family's extreme isolation and refusal to engage with outsiders meant their living situation remained hidden from view. Occasionally, some of the adults would venture out to take on odd jobs, but these interactions with the outside world were minimal. For the most part, the family remained completely cut off from society. The children were kept particularly isolated and were not initially enrolled in any public schools. This began to change when child services became involved. The family was receiving government benefits for the numerous children in their care, which prompted authorities to investigate. During this review, officials discovered that none of the children were attending school. Eventually, authorities forced the adults to enroll some of the kids in school, and that's what ended up exposing everything. The children were technically registered as students, but they barely showed up. When they did come to school, it was pretty obvious something was wrong. They were dirty, clearly not getting proper medical care, and way behind other kids their age in terms of development and learning. Teachers noticed right away and started getting worried about what was going on with this family. We don't know if the school reached out to child services before 2012, but someone definitely tried to get help. Between 2010 and 2012, anonymous callers filed 7 different risk of significant harm reports about the family. But despite all these red flags, nothing really happened. Then came the moment that finally blew the case wide open. One day in 2012, one of the Colt children was playing on the playground with her classmates when she said something that made everyone freeze. She casually mentioned that her sister was pregnant, but they didn't know which of her brothers was the father. This comment was disturbing for so many reasons. First, the girl who said it was elementary school age, and from the way she talked about it, she clearly had no idea how wrong this was, socially, legally, all of it. Second, the sister she was talking about was only 12 years old. If what she said was true, it meant serious sexual abuse was happening in that house. Another child overheard the conversation and told an adult. Word quickly reached local authorities, who decided it was time to take a serious look at this family. On July 18, 2012, police and child services showed up at the Colt property and opened an official investigation. Now, we don't know much about the original matriarch and patriarch of this family. They were given the pseudonyms Tim and June Colt in court documents. June was born in 1948, Tim in 1943, and they married in 1966 when June was 18 and Tim was 23. Here's where things get even more disturbing. The cycle of inbreeding actually started before Tim and June. June's own parents were brother and sister. That's really all we know about Tim and June's early lives, but what we do know is that they went on to have 7 children together. The pseudonyms given to their children are Rhonda, Betty, Martha, Frank, sometimes also referred to as Roderick in some sources, Charlie, Paula, and one more daughter. At some point in the 1970s, the entire family left New Zealand and relocated to Australia. They initially settled in Victoria, in the southeastern part of the country, but the family never stayed in one place for very long. The family lived a nomadic lifestyle, constantly moving around Australia, going from state to state, never settling anywhere for long. As the children got older, Tim started a family band that included himself, his son Charlie, his daughter Martha, and at least one other daughter, though it's unclear exactly which one. They played guitar and mandolin, sang together, and performed at festivals and music venues all across Australia. The band actually gained a bit of a following. They recorded music and even released an album of love songs. Knowing what we know now, that album is deeply chilling, because behind the facade of this musical family, Tim Colt was hiding something horrific. He began sexually abusing his daughters when they were just 12 years old. But it didn't stop there. Tim also encouraged his children to engage in sexual activity with each other. Tim systematically brainwashed his children into believing that having sex with their siblings and parents was completely normal. The results of this indoctrination were devastating. Rhonda, the oldest daughter, had 5 children, 4 of them fathered by her own father, Tim. Martha, the youngest daughter, had 6 children, most fathered by her brother Charlie, though it's suspected that Tim may have fathered some of them as well. But Betty was Tim's favorite daughter, and she would eventually become the next matriarch of the Colt family. Betty went on to have 13 children, and it's believed that most of them were fathered by her own father, Tim. Meanwhile, Martha and Charlie began living together as if they were husband and wife. They shared a bed and functioned as a couple within the family structure, but the reality was even more chaotic than that. For the most part, everyone in the family had sex with everyone else. There seemed to be no boundaries whatsoever. Children, starting from an extremely young age, were either abused by adults in the family or abused by other children. The cycle of abuse was continuous and all-encompassing. One of Betty's daughters, Petra, later revealed that her uncle Charlie started raping her when she was very young, and the abuse continued for years. This pattern repeated itself throughout the entire family. Abuse was everywhere. When one of the girls became pregnant, they were forbidden from seeing doctors for checkups or prenatal care. If they did end up giving birth in a hospital, they would lie about who the father was. This secrecy was one of the main reasons the family moved around so much. Whenever they felt like locals were starting to suspect something, they'd pack up and leave. They moved multiple times throughout the years, constantly staying one step ahead of scrutiny. And remember, during all of this, they still had their wholesome family band. They were still traveling to venues across Australia, playing country love songs for unsuspecting audiences. The contrast is sickening. On stage, they appeared to be a talented, close-knit musical family, but behind closed doors, they were living in what can only be described as an incest cult, with Tim as its leader. Then, in 2001, the matriarch June Colt died. We don't know exactly what caused her death, but she was still relatively young, only in her 50s. After June's passing, the entire family uprooted once again and moved to a very remote area of Western Australia. They always preferred isolated locations. It made it easier to hide what was really going on. With the family having grown so large, there were now many children. The isolation meant fewer questions from outsiders. The cycle continued, and Betty had essentially become Tim's successor. She was being groomed to take over as head of the family after he was gone. When Tim died in 2009, Betty naturally stepped into the leadership role. The family then purchased a plot of land outside Boorowa, New South Wales. The property seemed ideal for their purposes. It was large enough for the growing family, secluded in a backwoods area, far removed from the rest of society. No one would even know they were there. Tragically, the abuse continued. Instead of recognizing the harm and ending generations of suffering after Tim's death, his children perpetuated the same patterns. The adults indoctrinated their own children into believing that intimate relationships with family members were not only acceptable, but encouraged and expected. The youngest members of the family were particularly vulnerable. Many were the products of multiple generations of inbreeding, which resulted in significant cognitive and developmental challenges. Many couldn't speak clearly or understand complex ideas. This made them easier to manipulate and control, easier targets for the predatory adults in the family who convinced them this behavior was normal. What makes this situation so cult-like is the complete distortion of reality these children experienced. While there wasn't a religious component that we know of, the family operated under a twisted doctrine that promoted unrestricted relationships with no boundaries, no age limits, no consideration of family connections. These children's understanding of the world was fundamentally warped from birth. They were raised in an environment surrounded by predators, completely cut off from the outside world. Imagine being kept in total isolation on a remote farm where the rest of society doesn't even know you exist. Every day you live in fear, not just of one person, but of multiple family members. And there's no one to turn to, no one to confide in, because everyone is either participating in the abuse or suffering from it themselves. If it hadn't been for that one comment the little girl made on the playground that day, the cycle of abuse, incest, inbreeding and brainwashing in this family might still be going on today. Which brings us back to July 18, 2012, the day police and child services arrived at the Colt farm. They were completely unprepared for what they found. The first thing they noticed was the absolutely horrific living conditions. The property was fairly large, with 2 travel trailers or RVs, a small garden shed, and a larger shed that had tents set up inside with small beds. Everything was filthy. Both RVs were covered in dirt and hazardous materials on nearly every surface. The floors were caked with mud and littered with cigarette butts. Trash was piled everywhere. They even found a kangaroo sleeping in one of the children's beds. There was a tiny kitchen area, also completely filthy, with dirt covering the cooking surfaces. Some of the RV windows were broken, and exposed electrical wires dangled dangerously throughout. There was no running water, no toilets, no shower or bathtub. The children were visibly dirty and neglected. Everyone had been using the woods as a bathroom, and they had no toilet paper. Authorities found a small tub in one of the rooms with just a bit of water in it. This was apparently where everyone washed their hands. Without proper facilities, bathing was impossible, and it showed. Caseworkers later reported that the stench of urine and feces was almost unbearable. It was clear these people had been living in these appalling conditions for years. The decision was made immediately. The children would be removed from the property and placed into foster care while the investigation continued. Authorities could only remove the underage children from the property, so 12 children ranging in age from 5 to 15, were taken into protective custody. These children were in extremely poor physical and mental condition. Nearly all of them had severe fungal infections and significant dental problems. They couldn't read or write, and some could barely speak. They had never learned to use utensils and would eat with their hands instead. Basic concepts like using toilet paper or brushing teeth were completely foreign to them. They had zero knowledge of even the most fundamental hygiene practices. Many of the children had viral infections, were underweight and malnourished, and needed immediate medical attention. Some walked with limps. One boy had severe untreated psoriasis, and some struggled with basic bodily functions. Bobby, the 15-year-old, was functioning at approximately a kindergarten level intellectually. Many of the children also showed physical signs of generational inbreeding, unusual facial features, and premature aging. Some of the teens and adults looked decades older than they actually were. Several children required hospitalization to treat various medical conditions. While in foster care, the children began exhibiting deeply concerning behaviors that indicated severe trauma. Even the youngest children displayed age-inappropriate knowledge and actions. Foster parents reported disturbing incidents that suggested the children had been exposed to or subjected to sexual abuse from a very young age. The children didn't understand boundaries because they had never been taught any. When separated and placed with different foster families, they would sometimes have supervised visits with their siblings, during which case workers observed inappropriate behavior between them. Behavior the children didn't even try to hide because they genuinely didn't understand it was wrong. It became increasingly clear to investigators that these children had experienced profound and sustained trauma. Initially, the children were upset and resistant. Their farm and their relatives were all they had ever known. When removed from that environment, some became angry and aggressive, even making threats toward therapists and doctors who were trying to help them. But gradually, with patience and care, they began to trust the caseworkers and investigators. They slowly started opening up about the disturbing things they had witnessed and experienced while living on the farm. 7-year-old Nadia told investigators she had witnessed adults in the family being intimate with each other in close proximity to where the children slept. Several other children reported seeing similar things. Her mother was Martha, and it's believed her biological father was her Uncle Charlie. Dwayne told his foster parents that he and his siblings had been instructed to never tell anyone the truth about their father's identity, because they were told Betty would go to jail if the secret got out. Since the relationship had begun when she was just 12 years old, this was the tactic the family used to keep the children silent. There was always the threat that Betty would be taken away if anyone found out. The children shared deeply disturbing accounts of abuse. 13-year-old Kimberly disclosed that when she told her mother, Raylene, about inappropriate behavior between siblings, nothing was done. Some of the girls described attempting to hide in the woods to escape unwanted attention from male relatives. Essentially, every form of abuse imaginable was occurring within this family. Adults with each other, adults with children, and children with other children due to what they had been taught and exposed to. While in foster care, the children began revealing the truth about their parentage. Many of Martha's children said their Uncle Charlie was their father. Kimberly explained that she had the same father as both her mother Raylene and her grandmother Betty, meaning Tim Colt was her father. This meant Tim had fathered a child with his own granddaughter Raylene and was the biological father of his great-granddaughter Kimberly. Researchers believe Kimberly may be the most inbred member of the family. After hearing these accounts, authorities determined that DNA testing was necessary. In September 2012, the court ordered genetic testing on all 12 children removed from the farm. The results were devastating. 11 of the 12 tests confirmed the allegations of incest. Some children were the products of distantly related parents, like half-siblings or cousins, while others were the products of closely related parents, like full siblings or a parent and child. The only child who did not have related parents was 5-year-old Cindy, the youngest daughter of Rhonda. Rhonda claimed Cindy's father was a man named Jerry Phelps, with whom she had a brief relationship while working as a fruit picker. Interestingly, Cindy, the only child with unrelated parents, was also the only child described as well-spoken, developmentally on track, and without learning disabilities. The other adult members of the family were not DNA tested, only the underage children who were removed. So the 11 out of 12 finding doesn't capture the full scope of what was happening. Tim Colt alone is thought to have fathered at least 18 children within the family through relationships with his daughters and granddaughters. It's deeply frustrating that Tim died before facing any charges or public accountability, as he was the catalyst for everything that followed, the original leader of this abusive family structure. There was at least one death directly related to the inbreeding. In 2012, shortly before the case broke, a 2-month-old baby girl named Sally died of a rare genetic disorder. Tammy Colt, Betty's second daughter, whose father was likely either an uncle or her grandfather Tim, had 3 children with her brother Derek. Their youngest was Sally, who was born with Zellweger syndrome, a rare, usually fatal genetic disorder affecting multiple organs. Zellweger syndrome is an autosomal recessive disorder, meaning both parents must carry and pass on the same mutated gene for a child to develop it. Because the family had been inbreeding for so long across multiple generations, these genes were shared by many family members, significantly increasing the risk of genetic issues in their children. Another child, Martha's daughter Donna, died at just 2 weeks old, though the cause is unclear. After all of this, genetic proof of years of incest involving multiple people, children who had been severely abused and neglected, and their own testimonies, you would expect serious prison sentences. Unfortunately, the adults in this case served little to no jail time. The children were permanently removed from their mother's care, with a court order stating no contact until the children turned 18. The court decided it was too risky to ever return the children because all the mothers were denying that any incest had occurred. Since they wouldn't admit to anything, the court questioned how they could ever create a safe environment for the children. The women told the judge that every child had been conceived with unrelated outsiders, mostly drifters, each with elaborate names and backstories. One alleged father was supposedly named Sven, a Scandinavian tourist. When the judge presented the DNA evidence proving these stories were false, Betty, Rhonda, Martha, and Raylene kept denying everything. They couldn't understand why the court would believe a DNA test over their word. In 2013, Betty tried to execute a plan to take back 2 of her sons. She had secretly given 15-year-old Bobby and 14-year-old Billy a cell phone so they could stay in contact despite the court order. The boys kept it hidden in a plastic bag in bushes near their foster home. Police had Betty's phone monitored and heard her speaking to Bobby in what was described as an inappropriately flirtatious manner, calling his voice sexy, calling him gorgeous, and saying she couldn't wait to see him again. They also overheard her plan to take the boys to South Australia, beyond the reach of New South Wales authorities, where they would work as fruit pickers. Once police learned of the plan, Betty was arrested and sentenced to 12 months in prison. The only other person to serve significant time was Betty's brother Roderick. He was charged with assaulting his niece Petra in 2010. Petra testified that after an argument with her mother Betty, she had started walking down the road when Roderick stopped his truck, forced her inside, and violently assaulted her. When it was over, he pushed her out of the truck and verbally abused her. Petra was 17 at the time. Roderick was found guilty and sentenced to 4 years in prison. In total, 80 charges were brought against 8 adults in the family: Betty, Martha, Rhonda, Cliff, Derek, Charlie, Ray, and Roderick. The charges included incest, child abuse, indecency with a child, and perjury. But for reasons that remain unclear, most of these charges were dropped. Charlie alone was initially charged with 27 of the 80 counts. He was one of the worst offenders. In the end, he was only formally charged with 2 counts involving a minor under age 10. He pleaded not guilty, and the case went to trial. The foster mother of the girl involved testified tearfully about the condition the child was in when she arrived and the stories she had shared about the abuse she'd suffered. Despite this, Charlie was found not guilty. The judge cited inconsistencies in the girl's police interviews and evidence. The women did serve brief jail sentences, 1 to 2 years each, for perjury, as they continued to lie about the children's paternity. Unfortunately, because the children's identities have been protected, we don't know much about how they're doing today. I truly hope they're in safer environments. Many of them are adults now. Some appear to have reconnected with Betty and other family members. Betty's social media shows she primarily follows relatives from the family, and she even posted a photo captioned, "Love makes a family," which is deeply disturbing given everything that happened. I hope these survivors have gotten the help they desperately need. The adults in this case did start out as victims themselves. They were all abused by Tim and subjected to things no child should ever experience. But someone should have ended the cycle. Instead, they perpetuated it even after Tim's death. Personally, I think the adults should have served substantial prison time. Brainwashed or not, they clearly knew what they were doing was wrong. Otherwise, why tell the children to keep it secret? Why lie about paternity? But here's what I want to know. What do you think? Are the adults in this case guilty, or are they victims too? Should they have been held fully responsible, or does the trauma they experienced excuse their actions? Where do you draw the line between being a victim and becoming a perpetrator? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this case as shocking as I did and want to see more deep dives into cases like this, please consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps me continue bringing you these stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.